When we think of the 1980s and the golden age of animated shows, we tend to think of the big hitters like G.I. Joe, Transformers, TMNT, and the like, but there were a few that, for one reason or another, ended before they got their due. That hasn't stopped them, though, from reaching cult status and still being a beloved part of that era. And one of those shows was Inhumanoids, so let's talk about them. First, thanks for watching JL's Comics. Hit that subscribe button so you can keep up with all of our weekly content. And with that out of the way, let's jump into our story. The Inhumanoids line debuted in 1986, and the animated series lasted for just 13 episodes, but the series didn't begin as traditional 22-minute episodes. It actually began as a series of shorts that ran during the Super Sunday block, along with Bigfoot, Robotics, and Gem and the Holograms. These shorts were later collected into movies as other multi-part series events were at the time, and then expanded to its full run. Just like G.I. Joe, Transformers, Cops, Mask, and even Gem and the Holograms, the 1980s cartoon Inhumanoids was a joint production project between Hasbro and Sunbow Animation via Marvel Productions. And because of those through lines, there's a lot of crossover between Hasbro's franchises, and Inhumanoids is no exception. So to unpack this story, let's start there. Air Force pilot Brad Armbruster appeared in Inhumanoids and G.I. Joe. In G.I. Joe, Brad is codenamed Ace, and in Humanoids, he takes on the codename Saberjet. This is confirmed by Flint Dill, who said in an interview that the G.I. Joe XP-14F Sky Striker pilot got so badly messed up they used his jet as his body armor. Both series also include cameos from a news reporter named Hector Ramirez, a pastiche of Geraldo Rivera, who also appeared in Gem and the Holograms. More, the Inhumanoids were intended to be the creatures that the G.I. Joe team encountered on the Space Station Delta during the Pyramid of Darkness event, but after the scripts were already outlined, approved, and the episode's development moved far ahead, the team discovered that Hasbro no longer had the rights to the Inhumanoids' name and to the characters themselves, and so a quick switch needed to be done, and so the Inhumanoids were swapped out for the Fatal Fluffies. That all said, the basis for these creatures, the archetype, begins with H.P. Lovecraft. Flint Dill also said that if you combine Dungeons & Dragons, Lovecraftian lore, the Cold War, and current event headlines from the time, you get Inhumanoids. In the Inhumanoids world, in Episode 1, a fearsome monster was discovered in Big Sur National Park in California encased in amber. So the Earth Corps went to recover the creature. And so that begs the question, who are the Earth Corps? They're a government-sanctioned and funded group of scientists, led by a geologist named Herc Armstrong, codenamed Hooker, but not that kind, he had a grappling hook for a device. Hooker was voiced by Neil Ross. The team also included Derek Bright, codenamed Digger, who designed the team's armored suits, the archaeologist Ed Auger, who also made their vehicles, along with Jonathan the Liquidator Slattery, who was the resident chemist, and the team would later be expanded to include the financier Sandra Shore, and the pilot that we talked about, Saberjet. This government-funded operation to Big Sur was the impetus for a corrupt and degenerate industrialist named Blackthorn Shore to conduct his own unsanctioned operation. Blackthorn found a second creature and released it into the world. This creature was named Tendril, and Tendril was arguably the most Cthulhu-esque of the Inhumanoids monster trio. Tendril was a massive sentient plant creature and was the largest of the bunch. He had tendrils in his face and vines for arms. Those face tendrils were fangs in pre-production but were changed to vines due to safety concerns around the sharp teeth. So Tendril went to San Francisco to the event where the amber-encased creature that the Earth Corps recovered was set to be revealed at, and he attacked. And in doing so, Tendril released the creature from its amber, and together they rampaged through San Francisco, and this second creature was the monster Decompose. Voiced by Chris Latta, the voice actor of G.I. Joe's Cobra Commander, Decompose was a giant monster that could mutate people into zombies merely by touching them. During Earth Corps' subsequent investigation, Liquidator wound up back in Big Sur, where he was looking for clues as to where the monsters had come from. In Big Sur, Liquidator came across some sentient redwood trees, and the sentient trees, the redwoods, told Liquidator that they were part of a race of beings who lived under the surface of the planet called Mutors, and it was the Mutors who had captured and sealed away the horrifying monsters eons ago. They also revealed that a duo of Mutors named Magnacore were using their magnetic field powers to keep the monster leader named Metlar trapped below the surface, frozen in perpetuity by the force of their magnetic field, and Metlar can be compared to Nyarlathotep of H.P. Lovecraft lore. In Episode 3, Tendril struck back at the Earth Corps, attacking and destroying their base. So the Earth Corps chased the Inhumanoids into the Earth, and they were aided by some granite rock monsters called granites. However, Earth Corps were forced to resurface. Blackthorn Shore had a senator named Senator Masterson on his payroll, and so he forced Masterson to cut the Earth Corps' budget as part of his diabolical plan to free Metlar from his magnetic prison. It was Blackthorn's good sister, Sandra Shore, who told Earth Corps about this and then funded their rebuild so they could head back into the subterranean world. In episode 4, the Inhumanoids stole nuclear missiles from a Soviet base based on information they got from Blackthorn's shore, but Blackthorn was seemingly worried he went too far, so he warned EarthCorps about the nuke-equipped Inhumanoids. However, he wasn't worried. It was a trap. He knew they'd head below the surface again and would be in the same place near the Earth's core when the nuclear missiles were intended to detonate, thereby destroying his foes. However, EarthCorps was able to play on Decompose's fear of Metlar's plan and convinced him to help them disarm the nuclear missiles and avert planetary destruction. Essentially, Decompose was worried that he would die if the planet was blown apart. It was after the ensuing battle where Decompose was put back in an amber encasing and Tendril was then captured by the Granites. EarthCorps was able to stop Metlar and Blackthorn was arrested by EarthCorps. At the end of the 5-part story, Senator Masterson secured a new headquarters for EarthCorps. It was then discovered that a piece of Tendril was missing. Episode 6, entitled Cypheroid, is the episode where the investigative reporter Hector Ramirez made his debut. That piece of Tendril that was missing grew into a new Tendril, but he was quickly neutralized by EarthCorps. And that's when Senator Masterson interfered again and took this new Tendril and had it put in captivity where it was studied by an advanced supercomputer named Cypher. Cypher, though, was now a sentient artificial intelligence, and Cypher freed Tendril and then had Tendril go free Metlar and then was able to get Blackthorn released from jail. Hector Ramirez then had the bright idea to infiltrate a cult in San Francisco, which turned out to be a front for another of Blackthorn's schemes. Decompose showed up and turned some of the cult members, who were teenagers, into zombies that were then set loose on San Francisco. So EarthCorps had to come to stop the threat and stop the zombies, but without hurting them because they were, in their original form, merely kids. Speaking of zombies, Decompose also turned one of Blackthorn's associates into a zombie, and that zombie went by the name Nightcrawler. Episode 9, entitled Negative Polarity, is the episode where Tank paired up with Pyre and Crygen to harness power from a galvasite boulder to stop Metlar, but they reversed the polarity of the core and it turned Crygen and Pyre to evil and Metlar to good. While Metlar was good, EarthCorps worked with him to revert the polarity back to normal. When they achieved that goal, the two went back to good and Metlar changed back to his evil self. In episode 10, called Evil Eye, the cyclopean creature named Gargoyle, no R, made its disgusting debut. Blackthorn and Nightcrawler unearthed him inside of a radioactive volcano, so Gargoyle hatched from an egg and then ate the other eggs that it was laid with. So it kind of brings in some H.R. Giger and his xenomorph influences to mix with H.P. Lovecraft. Now that is a terrifying and rather horrific combination. In episode 11, Blackthorn traveled to a hidden temple in Borneo where the serpentoid and humanoid named Slither had been entombed for thousands of years, and Blackthorn freed Slither. Around this time, the EarthCorps were on a subsurface expedition and they were ambushed by the Inhumanoids, and the two factions fought a fierce fight. Liquidator deployed one of his chemical sprays, but the spray was not mixed right, so the formula ended up as a love potion instead of a neutralizing agent. As a result, Decompose fell in love with Blackthorn's sister Sandra, Tendril fell in love with a movie prop robot, and Metlar fell in love with the Statue of Liberty and stole it and took it back to his lair with him. In the penultimate episode, episode 12, called The Masterson Team, Hector Ramirez, Senator Masterson, and some other celebrities had the bright idea of getting in some vehicles and heading into the Earth to rescue the Statue of Liberty for themselves. EarthCorps was busy preparing for the wedding of Derek Bright to an actress named Stella Blaze, who had recently also been rescued from Tendril. This is where we also learn about an Air Force pilot who was shot down by Slither as he was flying over Angkor Wat in Cambodia. EarthCorps investigated this new threat and learned from the Redwoods in the Redwood Forest that Slither used to be the big bad leader of the Inhumanoids before Metlar rebelled, took over control of the Inhumanoids, and then he trapped Slither in his tomb on Borneo, which is where Blackthorn found him, and from that point forward, Metlar became the de facto leader. Who told them about this and who was that pilot? It was the gravely wounded Brad Armbruster, G.I. Joe codenamed Ace. Here, however, Brad was gravely wounded, and so they used his Sky Striker jet to construct a suit of armor for him, and with that, Brad became Saber Jet. So it was then up to EarthCorps to rescue the Masterson expedition and to stop Slither. During that mission, Metlar showed up to battle. Slither slithered away, and Metlar, free of the love potion, returned the Statue of Liberty to her home on Liberty Island in New York Bay. Plus, she apparently nagged him too much, so he wasn't too sad about it. The final episode took place a few months after the EarthCorps versus Inhumanoids battle, but a new threat loomed large. Senator Masterson was now running for president of the United States, and so Blackthorn intended to use the Inhumanoids to terrorize the other candidates and persuade them to withdraw from the race. So in response, Augur decided to run for president himself. And when Augur ultimately won the race, the Inhumanoids captured him. He was their bait to goad the EarthCorps, anyone really, into a final battle. So EarthCorps teamed up with Delta Force for the rescue operation. They went to Skelweb, fought a legion of skeleton warriors, battled through the Langistoid mercenaries to get to Metlar's molten base, and this was at the time the Redwoods and the Granites also rose up to take on Tendril and Metlar's forces. Decompose ran away as Magnacore neutralized Metlar with his magnetic powers, and Augur was almost killed, but Saberjet and Tank showed up to save him and win the day. So the Inhumanoids were ultimately defeated once more, and the Earth Corps vowed to always stand guard to defend the Earth against the threat of the Inhumanoids. And thus ended the 13-episode animated series. In 1987, Marvel Comics published a short-lived comic book series of mere 4 issues before being cancelled that adapted the Evil That Lies Within story from the beginning of the Inhumanoids animated show. The series was intended to go on longer, but it too was cut short, leaving us with some cliffhangers. The Inhumanoids animated series was cancelled before the toy line hit shelves, and was one of the reasons it was a financial failure. That won't stop us from talking about what could have been. The second wave of figures would have been expanded to include the character Saberjet from issue 12 and 13, and the second and third season were already being drafted and plotted, and according to one designer for the show, the Earth Corps may have met the devil himself by season 3, who was disguising himself as an evil human scientist. As if the creature design, story, and the feel of the show weren't already dark enough. In 2010, Hasbro intended to reboot Inhumanoids, but would have called it Primordia. And it's no coincidence that in IDW Publishing's 2010 Transformers animated Yellspark Almanac 2, we learned that a giant kaiju named Hojoni is also an Inhumanoid. It was shortly after this that Brian Flynn of Super 7 filed for trademarks for an Inhumanoids line of figures, and then a couple years later Marvel stepped in and challenged the application, saying it infringed on their Inhumans trademark. Brian kept his action figure and toy line trademarks, and Marvel kept the publishing rights, including the names of the Inhumanoids themselves. In 2017's G.I. Joe issue 5 by Aubrey Sitterson, the G.I. Joe team and even the Transformer Skywarp encountered the Fatal Fluffies in a very Inhumanoid-like form. A part Dire-Wraith female Doc and the team saw the Fatal Fluffies rise up out of the ground as terrifying, massive, monstrous beasts. And in 2020's ROM Dire-Wraith series, published also by IDW Publishing, they used the Inhumanoids but changed them enough to not violate trademark. For example, Earth Corps was now the Adventure 1 team. And it's interesting that it was the Fatal Fluffies who had to step in for the Inhumanoids in Citizen series, which means our story has now come full circle. And with that, that's a wrap on this one, my friends. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and you'll be one of the first to know when I upload videos just like this every week. I'm Jesse, this is JLS Comics, and I'll see you soon.